All right, continuing on with the what series for Bitcoin. This one is what else can Bitcoin do? We know it's a currency. We know it's a commodity. We know it's a monetary network.
And the idea was, first people thought, we'll move money without a trusted counterparty. And then they thought, well, I guess we could just keep the money in cyberspace forever without a trusted counterparty. And that was the medium of exchange and the store of value. But the third thought is, well, if there's something that I trust more than I trust any particular counterparty, maybe I can leverage that system of trust. And that was really the genesis.
So if Bitcoin is, and it appears to be, the most secure digital network available in the history of, in the history of digital networks, but in the history of networks, period, if it's the most trusted as a currency, if it's quickly becoming the strongest, as they say, the hardest currency out there, because it is trustworthy, because it is decentralized, what else could you do with it if it's got that high of a trust factor?
They're all very proprietary. And that's one of the challenges of digital identity today. You end up with a centralized identity, and maybe you're logging in with Facebook, you're logging in with Apple, or you're logging in with Google, and you start thinking, well, what happens if one of those websites or one of those systems gets hacked? Or what if it goes down? Or what if one government somewhere decides to send a court order to one of those, maybe the Australian government sends a court order to one of these things and they take you off the network. So it's a lot of anxiety. It's very fragile. It's very brittle. It's very expensive. And it just doesn't work that well. And I think that's been a frustration of a lot of people. You end up with all sorts of challenges with these frameworks. How do you verify who you are? Is the data private? Do you really want some central organization to know everything you logged into? How do they interoperate? And that caused us to start thinking, wouldn't it be great if instead of a blue check or a green check or a gold check or a black check, what if there's an orange check? What if there was a cyber passport that you got once in your life and it was based on public-private key cryptography that you could take with you? If I paid a nickel for it or a penny for it, and it was anchored into an immutable, unstoppable, incorruptible network, that could be a global standard as opposed to some local nation state standard. And
so what he's describing, Michael Saylor's describing, is something we're all familiar with, but he was describing, blue, black, green check marks. These are these check marks that social media is using to verify you as an individual. We live in a world filled with fraud, and the creation of AI is drastically increased that. As we all know, there's a ton of talk about, individuals and families needing safe words that because they can with AI, they can replicate an individual's voice, their image, and all those things, and needing safe words that if I call my wife over the phone and I say I'm in Mexico in prison and send me $100,000, she can verify with me through a safe word that that's the case. Well, what MicroStrategy is proposed and is now building out is this orange check mark that's tied into Bitcoin. And it's not just for social media, it's across all avenues that you can use to verify who you actually are.
Throw it back.
Stay dripped to the feet, night ticks.
Do it. But we haven't really levered this idea of public-private key cryptography anchored into a proof of work network for most commercial applications. And MicroStrategy thought maybe we could approach this idea of decentralized identity combined with Bitcoin and then create an enterprise application for it. So that was the genesis of this Orange project. And what you can see is on one side, you've got the decentralized identity, and that's the public-private key pair. On the other side, you've got the Bitcoin network, which is your system of record, which is really just a global fault-tolerant computer system controlled by no government, no corporation, no person. Our vision is to provide an internet-native, decentralized digital identity backed by Bitcoin. So we want to use the open standard of DID.
So there you have it. Using decentralized network of Bitcoin to provide a decentralized identity, what he's calling an orange check mark, to secure your identity as an individual going into the future, let alone corporations and everything else. I know for myself at work, we have to constantly watch videos now about how not to get hacked, because the weakest link within corporations is the individual themselves.
Specifically, Ryan.
I have to watch them constantly. Everybody else just watches once a year. If that's not cool enough, let's take it to a whole nother level. This is Jason Lowery, a major with Space Force. He's also like an MIT graduate of astro engineering, right up there with Michael Saylor.
Just money. Bitcoin is, and I know a lot of people on Twitter will be angry at me for saying this, Bitcoin is a weapon system, just like GPS is a weapon system. It is a weapon system designed explicitly for self-defense, and it is extremely effective, right? It is literally nuclear resistant. Like every piece of it was designed explicitly to be resistant to nuclear strikes. So that's pretty interesting, right? There's probably some national strategic opportunities with Bitcoin that we could take advantage of. And that's kind of what I want to explore.
Okay. So 2 things. One is recently Naval Ravikant had a tweet where he said that Bitcoin is the Second Amendment, which is very in line with what you're talking about here in terms of it is the defense mechanism. It is your right to bear arms, right? Not necessarily for offensive purposes, but also for defensive purposes. And so when you start to think about this, the network itself, when you unpack the players or the market participants, if you will, there's the miners and the node operators. How do you think about the relationship between those two as part of this defense system for your purchasing power or your...
So we're getting in deep now. Yeah, you have to watch these videos or read Jason Lowery's Soft War book as he gets into the history of warfare and such, and why he feels that Bitcoin being labeled a currency and regulated by the Commodity Commission is not right. It should be the Department of Defense. And he puts up, it's a pretty damn convincing argument. So let's keep going here.
Monetary entity as well. Bitcoin is all 3. It is a military, it is a rule of law, and it is money. The miners, the mining network is its military. The nodes and the software is the rule of law and the legislation and all the voting. The least interesting part of it, in my opinion, is the money, the Satoshis, right? That's like the thing that comes last. What makes Bitcoin so special is that it has its own military that is literally as powerful as nation-state militaries.
If you have at least...
Playing these type of videos is what gets me labeled crazy. But it's like I said, I was saying, he backs it up with some data and history and information that is incredible in his book, Soft War, and a lot of his interviews.
I could be wrong. I might have just looked it up. I think we've talked about him before. I think we've had him on there when we were doing a lot of Pompliano interviews. Because and it is. It's super interesting. And the more they get into it, you're like, yeah, boy. Yep, that makes sense. That makes sense. Everything you're saying makes sense.
If it truly is the most secure digital network out there, good enough that it made the hardest money of all history, good enough to protect your identity, then the rest of this stuff is not that far-fetched, especially when they get into it. And part of what I cut out, which is in that video, is he talks about all the equipment that's involved with build the SHA-256, like internet itself, GPS systems. All of those were weapon systems initially, and still are. They just were such advanced technologies, they became a lot of other things too. But great video. I've tried to get my hands on his book. I haven't tried hard enough, but I went to buy his book, and of course it got removed from shelves. He was told, do not sell those books, so you got to buy them secondhand now. So Bitcoin is a lot of things, including decentralized identity protection and weapon systems.